Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of About Abroad, where it's my job to introduce you to people who have built amazing lives for themselves in various foreign corners of the globe. We're talking with expats and thought leaders about moving abroad, remote work, visas, and all the fun and practical knowledge that you need to know to follow in their footsteps. If you've ever dreamed of making a life for yourself overseas, maybe working remotely or embracing long-term travel, retiring or studying abroad, or even just taking a peek inside life beyond your borders, you've landed in the right place. This episode is brought to you in partnership with Wanderers Wealth. One of the greatest challenges and also one of the greatest opportunities for digital nomads, expats, people who are building businesses abroad is in the world of international taxes. It's not the most fun subject to talk about, but it's one of the most important and confusing that I hear about all the time from those of you in the audience. So I've had Kathy on the show before. She's the CEO of Wanderers Wealth. And afterwards, I became a customer of hers because her global tax strategy design course is incredible. It literally walks you through all the steps that you need to take in order to take advantage of the international tax system that is set up to actually help those of us that are living this international lifestyle. So it's highly recommended. You can find the link in the show notes for her global tax strategy design course. Check it out and let me know what you think. My guest today is my new friend, Anthony, who is coming to us from Italy, one of the most popular countries in the world to visit, and a place that many of us can actually move to and get a passport for, which would give you access to the entire European Union if you have any blood ties to Italy. So Anthony walks us through that process and shares all the details for anyone wanting to make that move. He's spending a whole year there living in Italy and getting his passport. He also walks us through some of Italy itself, some of his favorite regions and places that he's experienced, and some of the ups and downs of the whole process. So whether you want to actually follow in his footsteps and get your Italian passport or just kind of take a trip through Italy, this one's a good one. I hope you'll enjoy, and please help me in welcoming Anthony to About Abroad. Yeah, man, I am so excited to finally learn a little bit about this process. And I'm going to actually let you kind of set the stage because I don't want to say it incorrectly. Can you tell me and the audience a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, so we'll be talking, first off, thanks for having me. This is really exciting for me to be able to share some of this, and it's great to meet you. So we'll be talking a bit about the Italian citizenship recognition process. Basically, what I'm doing is right now I'm living in Italy, and through a process called Iure Sanguinis, which is a Latin term that basically means citizenship by blood. Through that entitles me to be able to acquire Italian citizenship through my bloodline. So in my case, I have great-grandparents who came from Italy in the early 1900s, and essentially they pass on the citizenship. And the interesting thing to point out, and we can get into this more, is the way the law reads, I am already an Italian citizen. This process recognizes you as an Italian citizen with the end goal of you getting an Italian birth certificate and an Italian passport. And there's a lot of steps in between, but yes, in theory, technically I'm already a citizen, but it doesn't mean anything without all the paperwork, obviously. So the people that know a lot about this process are very strict. You're not applying for Italian citizenship. You're getting your already existing citizenship recognized. So it's just kind of interesting. But, I don't really tell people here that I'm already a citizen in their eyes.
Yeah, that's an interesting dichotomy. I'm sure they're like, the locals are like, look, man, you're a foreigner. Okay, you're not from here. But the government's like, no, you're a citizen, man. You belong.
Yeah. They're like, we see your open-toed shoes that you wear year round. You're not Italian.
Are you a Chacos guy?
I'm not a Chacos guy. I'm just a sandals, like standard flip-flops. If it's just warm enough, I'll wear them. But man, in Italy, they love their closed-toed shoes. They wear sandals only for the beach or the pool, and that's it. Otherwise, they're judging your feet pretty hardcore if they can see them.
I get a lot of I am a Chacos guy and a flip-flops guy, and I get a lot of comments about these shoes in like the Southern Europe part of the world, which I, like you're saying, I find hilarious because I'm like, it's hot hot here. Like, you guys have coastline everywhere. You don't want to just wear sandals all the time?
Very strange.
Yeah, this is fascinating, man, because so I heard about this program, first of all, probably 5 years ago, 6 years ago, something like that. I don't think it's been around that long. Am I incorrect in that? Like, is it a relatively new program?
It's actually been around for a very long, decades and decades. It's just more maybe with social media and people, it's kind of catching more. And yeah, it's definitely getting more and more popular.
I think with like global mobility, people having more access, obviously, I mean, the internet opening it up and then remote work and opportunities to move abroad. So yeah, that probably explains why I do distinctly think I was told like, yeah, there's this new program in Italy where you can like I think the story that I was told was that Italy decided they wanted to bring their people back. A lot of, there's like a mass exodus from Italy in the middle of the century. And, there's like a ton of Italian immigrants in the US, for instance. And so the story that I was told was it was a process to try to repopulate the country in a way, and that it was a relatively new thing. But obviously that was false. And I'm sure some other things were false. So I'm excited for you to, kind of set me straight in a lot of different ways. Maybe we could start by giving some context. You are obviously not Italian according to the local standards. The government says so, but you weren't born and raised there. So maybe you could tell me a little bit about your background, where you're from, and kind of we can work our way up to where you are today.
Yeah, so I'm born and raised just outside of Atlanta, Georgia, about 30 minutes north of Atlanta. I am 50% Italian, as we like to say in the US. They laugh at that in Italy. They're like, you Americans are so obsessed with your genealogical breakdown. You're 20% this and that. But I am half Italian through my dad's side. But I lived my whole life in Georgia, which was a really great place to grow up. And yeah, I would never say that I had a very strong Italian upbringing. It was like some good Italian cooking that we had at home and some kind of leftover residual cultural things. My dad doesn't speak Italian. His parents didn't speak Italian. They spoke Neapolitan, separate language in the household, but they never bothered the kids. And fair, why would they? It's such a weird language. It's basically useless in the US.
Is it drastically different from Italian? Like, is it just a dialect of Italian, or does it sound like distinctly different?
It's distinctly different. It is a separate language, and people who don't know Neapolitan but speak Italian, they can't understand. It's the most widely spread language in Italy that's not Italian.
Okay. And so people are still speaking this in parts of Italy today?
They are in southern Italy and around Naples, Campania region, and other parts it's spread. A lot of them still speak it exclusively at home. I have a friend, for example, they only speak house.
This is kind of fascinating thing, I think, for us, like as Americans, coming from this giant country with 350 million people and where you can just cross the entire thing and hardly hear a different accent sometimes. And then you go to a country like Italy, or like I've been living in Spain, and they're like, yeah, there's 7 official languages. You're like, you have 50 million people in 7 languages? Like, this is insane.
And I didn't even know when I went to Valencia the other month, I didn't realize that they have, I guess, one of the 2 official languages in Valencia. It's Spanish, obviously, and then it's, how do you say it exactly?
Valenciano. Yeah, actually, I got called out on this. I was on another podcast recently, and the guy was like, Valenciano is not a language. I was like, yes, it is. Like, they have it listed as an official language, and he did some Google searching in the middle of the interview and said apparently somewhere deep in the text it actually says that it's just a dialect of Catalan. But if you ask Valenciano, like Valencians, and I think according to Spanish government, it's its own language, but it is super similar to Catalan. But in Spain they have Catalan, Basque, Spanish, which they call Castellano, and Valencian and Galician. And those are like the official languages. And then you also have like Andalus, which pretty much sounds like another language. So it's like, yeah, it's like a pretty small country. Anyway, it is like, it's just interesting for people like us from Georgia and North Carolina. Like you hear, there's Neapolitan. Like, what? I didn't even know.
Right, exactly. So yeah, like I said, grew up in Georgia. I studied engineering, was working as an engineer for about 7 years after college, and just kind of had a bubbling up in me of wanting to do something abroad, some kind of expat thing, whether it was working abroad or doing a gap year. I just had a growing itch to do something. And in 2019, I heard about the possibility of the citizenship thing. We're all eligible for getting Italian passports, and he told me about it, and I thought, well, that sounds kind of complicated. Let me know how it works out. It sounds cool, but I didn't really think much of it. And then 2 years later, I was back, seeing my family. So that side of the family is all from New England. When I was up there visiting for 4th of July 2021, and talking to my cousin. And I said, we were talking more about the citizenship. Like, we should really, try to do this. And there's two paths of ways you can do this, which the most people do this through the US, through an Italian consulate in the US. And I think there's 9 consulates. I can get more details about that. Or you can do it in Italy. So at the time, last year, we were talking about doing it at the consulate in the US. So we thought this could be interesting to do. And I told him, I was like, my cousin's name's Mike. I said, we should go to Italy. And we're extremely fortunate position to have connections to the town that our ancestors came from. So a lot of them emigrated from the small town in the Campania region of Italy to a city in Massachusetts, Springfield, Massachusetts. So through my family in New England, they know Calvanese, which is the American in the US, and they have connections to this town. So through my uncle, this is an immense sign of like luck that not everybody has access to, but it's kind of interesting. He got us in touch with somebody over there. Anyway, so my cousin and I planned a trip. I said, let's just go. Let's do like a vacation to Italy. But while we're there, let's do this side mission of going to this town and trying to recover the original birth and marriage records of our great grandparents. And so we booked the trip. We went to Rome. It was an amazing time. It was my first time going to Italy. And then we made the trek down to that town. Prior to that, we had coordinated with somebody in the town, one of our connections who, it's all Italian with them. It was all Google Translate back and forth. I didn't speak any Italian at the time, just like ciao and grazie. We got in touch with the mayor of the town and we told them we were coming and said, we're so-and-so's nephew and his son, my cousin, we're going to come out and say hello. And also we're going to try to get these documents to help us out. That would be great. We had very little expectations because they didn't owe us anything. So we showed up to the town. If this is too far down the story, feel free to change course.
No, this is what this is all about, man. This is great.
It's just too strange not to tell. It's interesting. But we showed up to the town. We were like an hour late because we were coming from the Amalfi Coast and the traffic there is crazy and the roads and everything. Just navigating is kind of a challenge to say the least. Anyway, we show up and we're in this small little town. It's about 5,000 people. I think it was maybe a Saturday, so it was kind of busy. And we're driving through real slow. I told the guy we were meeting up what car we were in, and we see this guy kind of jump out of the side of the road and like wave us down. He's like, "Hey, Calvanese." And that's kind of how they pronounce our last name. And we're like, "Yeah." He's like, he kind of waved, like, "Follow me." So Mike and I just looked at each other. I guess we're following this guy. So we just follow behind his car. We're just driving, and it's like we look at each other, and it's like, all right, Mike, we're either gonna get like set up to marry 2 Italian women here, or we're about to get whacked. It was just like the mayor's gonna try to have us marry.
This is how like the Godfather movies start,
Yeah. It's like we're going to meet the mayor's daughters or something. Neither of those things happened. And that's the last mafia joke I'll make. But that is kind of the joke that we made. It was really funny. So we ended up following him and we met the mayor. We went into the town hall. It's called the Comune. We went into the town hall and went into the mayor's office. And it was just such a surreal experience. They rolled out the red carpet for us. They fed us. They gave us coffee. And this is all because we had the familial. Not anybody can just walk into the Comune and get treated this way. So I recognize we are extremely privileged and lucky in this way. But we were chatting with them, talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes good people get blessed with good experiences, like, and I think like if you put yourself out there enough and with good intentions, like you were going to collect your grandparents, like documents, great grandparents document, like, I don't know. I mean, that's a pretty wholesome thing to do. Like I would imagine people are like, they're warm up to that kind of thing,
Yeah. And they gave us lunch, they gave us coffee. They did like a little micro ceremony presenting the documents. They had the original books, the original giant text where it was all handwritten, the marriage and the birth record. And then they gave us kind of the digitized 8.5 by 11 format of those. And they took a bunch of pictures with us. And then later that day, like as we're driving home, I was looking at my phone. I was like, Mike, they just wrote an article about they literally wrote an article in their local website that they have for that region. And it was like so excited that we were there that they wrote this whole story about, the Americans come and the Italians respond and take care of them. And it was such an amazing, strange day. And we spent the whole day with the mayor, well, most of the day with the mayor and some other people. It was such a bizarre, but like beautiful and amazing experience. So
what a warm welcome home, right?
Exactly. I mean, it was my first time in that town. My cousin had been there when he was younger. He went with his some time ago. So, that definitely helped out. And that is kind of where it really started for me, because at that time I didn't know anything about the process and the technicalities of what document. I was kind of just following my cousin's lead. I was like, all right, we need these documents. All right, let's just go do it. And then it was on that trip, I researched some more and realized that you could do the process of citizenship recognition in Italy. And I thought that could be interesting. So then I went home after the trip and it was amazing. Properly fell in love with Italy and the food and everything, like everybody does, most of Europe. And I researched the process a bit more and I realized that, okay, to do this through a consulate, let me back up one step. The way that you are eligible for this is if your Italian ancestor, your last registered Italian ancestor, so who was a reported Italian citizen, they had to have offspring prior to naturalizing as a citizen of a foreign. So in my case, our great-grandparents came over and had my grandfather before naturalizing. When prior to 1992, the law was if they naturalized in the US or another country that wasn't Italy, just by naturalizing, they gave up the Italians. So if they do that and then have kids, the line is broken. They do not pass on Italian citizen. But if they have kids before they naturalize, if they naturalize at all, then they pass it on. And that child is a citizen and they, assuming they don't give up their citizenship, they pass. So in our case, it's been passed on from our great grandfather to our grandfather to our fathers. So that's the critical piece.
But presumably at some point, somebody naturalized in that.
Yes.
And so I'm trying to think through the process, like I'm going through those steps in the genealogy. So what happened if your parents were born in the US? And so that doesn't break the line.
It doesn't break the line because they had to voluntarily give up their citizenship at that point. It wasn't that they did that. It's because they couldn't help where they were born. So by being born in the US, they didn't lose the Italian. They would have had to have actively given it up, which is one of the checks that they do in the process. They go back to the consulates and see where you've lived and make sure that you and none of your ancestors actively went and said, I want to give up my Italian citizenship, which never really happened.
Yeah, I was thinking who did that? So in your case, your great-grandfather is the one that left Italy, but he had your grandfather before he left Italy.
He had my grandfather in the U.S. He came to the U.S. and was not a U.S. citizen. He actually never became a U.S. citizen because he died fairly young. But he never became a U.S. citizen, but he had our grandfather in.
And so that doesn't break the line because your grandfather couldn't help that he was born. But if your great-grandfather had said, I gave it up, turning in my Italian passport, I want a U.S. passport, that would have broken the line. Okay.
Yeah. If he did that and then had kids, those kids would not be Italian.
And can you go back can you go back as far as you want? And
so there's no limit to the generations as long as it's after. So Italy as a nation didn't exist until 1861. It was unified in 18. Prior to 1861, there was no such thing. So obviously it would have to be after that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. I think that's an interesting point though. I know many of us associate Italy with Roman culture and the Colosseum, and you associate Italy with a lot of things, but I think it could be easily forgotten that it's a relatively young country because we associate it with so much history, but country of Italy is actually a pretty new country in historical terms.
Yeah, and you see that today with all the dialects and languages. Italian wasn't, fact check me on this please, but I think that Italy wasn't the official language until 2007, which sounds crazy, but not so crazy when you think about the fact that in the US we still don't have it.
Yeah, exactly. And that Spain has 6.
Exactly. So there were all these sub-nations, you could say, that had their own languages. And then eventually it's all right, Italy's our language. So a lot of people say that Italy is the most spread foreign language in Italy is Italian.
I never heard that. That's good. Yeah, there's Venetian and Genovese and Neapolitan you mentioned. Okay, this is coming together for me. Yeah, that makes sense.
So once you can prove that your ancestor did not naturalize before having kids, then they pass on the citizenship and then you put in the work. Because if that happened, they broke the line. Don't waste your time collecting documents. Unfortunately, not happen. The other important thing too is for a while that could only be passed on through the male side. For females, it was not possible until 1948, and there was a change in the law that said after 1948 to be passed on through females. Prior to 1948, no. But this has been challenged in court thousands of times successfully, and so if it is through your female side of the lineage prior to 1948, you can still do it. It is unfortunately a little bit more work. They haven't made it as easy as the male side, but it is possible. But that is interesting to look at, historical discrimination. That
completely ridiculous.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
It's so ridiculous. It makes absolutely zero sense from our vantage point today. But okay, yeah, and I mean, been a lot of wrongs done to females over the years, so that we'll add that one to the list. All right.
Yeah. So once you've proven that you're eligible, then you begin the process of collecting the document. You need, at a minimum, you need birth and marriage records for everybody in the line, and you need to prove that there's an unbroken. Sometimes you need death certificates. It depends on where you do it. So like I said, you could do the consulate route, and I'm speaking from the U.S. point. This is a whole process as well, and anywhere where there's Italian, descent. So Brazil has a large population. Argentina has quite a bit. Chile, Venezuela, a lot of South America. So you could do the consulate route in your home country or do it through Italy. Now, the difference is through a consulate in the US, so we have 50 states, but we don't have 50 consulates. There's 50 consulates, air quotes, because not all of them actually have the authority to issue passports or process citizenship requests. So there's, I think, 9 that serve the US. So for me, growing up in Georgia, the Miami consulate serves that. And because there's only 9, serving the thousands of people who want to do this process takes a while. So get a appointment, and this is just to get the appointment to walk in and submit all your paperwork. The wait list time is like 3 to 5 years. So I did, as a backup last year, because I didn't know what my plan was yet. I said, all right, I'm going to make Miami. This was the end of 2021. The soonest I could get was April 2024. And so at that date, you would have all of your paperwork, and it's all notarized, it's all translated, it's all apostilled. I can get into what that is. And I can give plenty of resources because we can't cover it all in this time. But you would submit your packet of information at this appointment after 3 years, 4 years, and then they start reviewing. And that alone could take another year and a half. And if they come back and say, your package was 80% good, but these things you need to check, so they'll give you some homework, and then you have a window to do it. If you miss your window and you can't get the documents in, then you are at risk of having to restart the whole thing over, have to make another appointment. So I was looking at that like, okay, this could take 5 years. And, it's not like I'm trying to get out of the US as quick as I can. I'm not in any rush to do this, but I learned that I could do the process by establishing residency in Italy, and I could do it in probably less than a year. And that combined with, like I said, the urge to do something abroad kind of pointed to maybe I should just do this kind of a thing. And I think just from like a life philosophy standpoint, I only say this because it's one of the pieces that led me to being here, is I've always been, I would say, moderately aggressive in terms of saving, the whole financial independence, hire early thing. I felt like I'd like to save and invest, do all that so I could, 40, 45, retire early, and then do all the cool stuff. But last year I had a trip to Colorado with my best friend booked. We were going to go mountain biking out in Colorado in September. And then unfortunately there was some news that broke about his wife. She was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Luckily, we're a year later. She's doing well and responding very well. Very, very fortunate. But that obviously changed our plans for Colorado, so we canceled that trip. I said, well, I can't go mountain biking in Colorado without him. So we'll do that at another time for sure. But that was kind of a wake-up call for me because, I'm so crazy about saving money and saving for the future, which is still important. But I realized, obviously, life is short. Nothing's guaranteed. When you're older and have a bunch of money, what good is it if you're in poor health or, God forbid, something happens and you're no longer around when you're 50? So that was a shift in my mindset to kind of a more moderate mindset, which, I still think obviously important to have financial security and all that. But it was more fuel to the fire for me of taking basically what I'm doing now, which is a gap year, saying, this is maybe not the most smart financial decision, but it's a good life decision, and it'll be a great experience, especially considering I had lived within 20 minutes of the town I grew up for 29 years, my whole life, never lived anywhere else. So I went from one extreme to the other, which is really funny when you step back and look at it.
I can relate to you. I was just going to say really quick, I can relate to you. Super happy to hear your friend's wife is doing well. And a lot of us have those moments that something, a life event happens that changes your trajectory a little bit, and you go, okay, I've got to do this now or whatever. And for some people, it's not so dramatic. And I would say that was the case for me, is I was also going down that same path at about the same time in life, if I'm not mistaken, and just really focused on career, saving, investing, doing all the smart things, I guess, what society says is this is the smart way to do life. You have your career, you invest in, you buy a home as quickly as possible, you pay it down as fast as possible, you diversify your investments, focus on all those things, and the rest will work itself out. And I still wholeheartedly believe in a lot of those things, but I recognized but I'm also not really living the way I want to be living living. Like I have this strong desire to go explore, and I'm just quelling that, like just subduing that all the time. And that doesn't feel like a great thing. Like I was fine doing that for 6-7 years, but I realized like I've got to do this for like another like 20 years. And that's going to be really hard to do. And so I guess I mention all that because, I rarely meet people like yourself who regret changing that trajectory a little bit. I certainly don't regret changing the trajectory. Made some sacrifices on the other side of the equation, like, oh, I'm not saving as much as I used to, or I'm not, doing all those quote unquote smart things that I started out doing necessarily, but I'm still doing some of them and I'm doing them the best I can. I'm trying to find, I'm consistently seeking that balance between the adventure and building for the future and all of that. So I don't know if that's helpful for somebody listening, but I think it's good to kind of, that's part of the reason for sharing here, is like that's part of the journey.
Absolutely. And like you said, it's to go from one extreme, to start at an extreme and then back away from it. You can still keep some of those values, which are still good. It's still responsible to save. It's still responsible to think about that. These are all good. Go the other direction. Obviously, you'll do a gap year and you'll burn out after 6 months. You'll spend all your money.
Exactly. I see a lot of people do that, and that's fine. You have your like moment in the sun, and then you're back to the cube or whatever. But I mean, it's good. I think it's good to have this like sustainable approach, and I think also people are genuinely happier that way. Like if you go on this like we'll call it a gap year for right now, but I mean sometimes it's a couple months or even much shorter. You go and you like just dive in head first. You're in vacation mode. Like that really gets old fairly quickly. Like you miss your old life a little bit, or you start realizing like I don't have a purpose. I need something to do. I don't know a lot of people that really enjoy that for that long before you start seeking some more meaning.
Right. That's definitely true. I definitely understand that now.
You mentioned, so you said the word gap year, but do you have like a year mentality, or what is your thought process?
So I do have a year mentality that at the end of the year, my plan is to go back to the US. But like we were chatting a bit before the show, I think that I would like to incorporate what I'm doing now in my life forever to an extent. Obviously I can't. So with this process right now, with the citizenship, I'm not working. Legally, you cannot work while you're awaiting this process without a visa, which to me fortunately, it wasn't a big deal for me. I was able to take that time off and use it to explore and such. But I would like to incorporate some abroad component of my life future. This will be a gap year, but I want this to extend in part of my life where maybe I spend, I don't know, a third of the year in Italy, working remote, doing something.
But you'll have an Italian passport, so you can go anywhere and for as long as you want as that unfolds. So that's cool to know where your mindset is. I also realized that I digressed us a little bit. So you were talking a little bit about you could go the consulate route, which you sort of have that as your backup plan, but you could also just literally go to Italy. I have a question about that. Normally, you can only stay in Italy for 90 days as an American or foreigner, generally speaking, without some sort of like other visa, like just your tourist visa. So did you apply for something that allows you to stay longer?
Yes, that's a really good question. So part of the process in Italy, because in theory you could do it in less than 90 days, but you should never plan on that because the process can take a while. Italian bureaucracy is notorious for being not the most efficient. So I came with a plan of minimum 6 months. And for that reason, you should apply for what's called a permesso di soggiorno una testa di cittadinanza, which basically just means it's a permit that allows you to stay in Italy while you are doing this weird citizen process. You can stay until the process. I do think there's an upper limit. It might be like 2 years or something, which if the process is taking that long, something's gone wrong. But so yeah, I do have that visa right now that's letting me stay like, I don't know, I think I'm at maybe 120, 130 days in the EU at this point. So I have that visa. The funny thing is, I don't actually have the visa. I have an appointment to get the visa, and the appointment is in November. But you just have to at least show that you have the appointment.
I've come across this as well. Yeah, I've come across the same thing with like visa renewals and stuff. It's like this super formal thing where you've got these things in your passport, like whole pages taken up, and then when that expires, it's like, well, no, look here on my phone, I can show you like I have an appointment, or a little piece of paper that says I have an appointment to do this in like 6 months, and they're like, the officials are like, okay, yeah, that's good.
At least I think that would be the case in Italy and probably Spain. I don't know if something like that would fly in like Germany or the Netherlands.
No. There's a much more formal process for sure.
But yeah, so it's in order to get that visa, you have to do a number of things. So when you arrive in Italy, you have to have a declaration of presence show that you are in Italy. You have to get a stamp showing you arrived in Italy. So if you come through another EU country, like I connected Paris and I got the stamp there, not in Italy, kind of a headache. So I would tell anybody who's doing this, get a direct flight if you can. Saves you from having to go to the police station. But you have that, and that declaration of presence is what you then use for applying for the permesso di soggiorno. And then also you need to have, when you're doing the citizenship in Italy, you have to have residence. So it has to be a apartment, something like an apartment with a lease agreement. So unfortunately, like an Airbnb doesn't apply. That would be a letter of hospitality, which is the comune needs to see a lease agreement that shows that you live here. Like you're not on vacation. You are a resident of this town. And the whole process of the citizenship, the paperwork, everything is processed.
You kind of have a chicken or egg thing, right? Because like, and to make something really clear, you've arrived, like you haven't done any of this before. You're arriving on basically a 90-day tourist visa, just like anybody else, and then applying for this extension, essentially.
Yeah, you apply for the extension, and so you arrive, you get I'm forgetting all the specific steps, and it's because I'm using a company that's helping me with it, which I'll get into.
Which I highly recommend for anybody doing. Like, I mean, not just in Italy, just in general, like hiring a local third party is so well worth it.
It makes a big difference, especially if you don't speak the local language fluently. So you apply for residency, you get the residency, they do a check. The police come to your apartment and check that you actually live there, ask you some basic questions. And then you get that. And then once you get that, you can submit your citizenship application. You got your whole package of marriage and birth records and all this stuff translated. You submit it to the comune. And then you have a paper that says, I'm awaiting this citizenship. It's at that point you get the permesso di soggiorno. So you can't get the extended visa until you can prove you submitted the application. So there's a lot of steps. And like I said, in theory, some people have done it in less than 3 months, but that's extremely rare. So it's usually a good idea to just do it. And
I would always recommend with these things, like my experience working with governments and particularly like ones that have a reputation for just being a bit more bureaucratic or a little bit lower, like you just double whatever they say, like just literally double it. If it's 6 months, give yourself a year. If it's 3 months, give yourself 6 months. Because otherwise, I mean, yeah, maybe you can get it done in 3 months or even 4 months or something, but you're going to be sweating bullets through the whole process, you know? Like you don't want to rush this and feel stressed about it. I mean, and a lot of it's out of your control. Like you can go as fast as you want, but you're dealing with governments and other people.
And it's definitely an exercise in patience, flexibility. Things are going to happen that are off schedule, you know, whatever schedule you had in your head, and you got to just roll with the punches. That's why for me being here a year has given me that where I don't really have to worry about drags on a little bit. You know, we were initially told, you know, it probably could be done in 90 days, but we're past that at this point. You know, we don't know exactly where the office is at because we're now entering the month of August, which is, you know, basically the European holiday. So they're running at very limited capacity. So it's an exercise in patience. And luckily for me, I have a lot of patience and I'm flexible enough to be able to not have to worry about it right now.
You strike me as a pretty patient guy, and you've given yourself this year and like you're not getting too frustrated about it. I also think it's important to like remember two things, like especially for people coming from Western country where Americans in particular, maybe like we come from this like hustle, super efficient country that's like you have very high expectations, and that's awesome in a lot of ways, but it also creates like a high level of stress and like anxiety in a way. Like you just expect things, you know, like even just a small thing like going out to eat, like you expect a certain level of service and you expect like your drinks to be full and you kind of have these really high expectations, and it works and that's awesome in a lot of ways. But going to a place like in my experience in Spain and also in Italy, and I gather from you as well, it's like the same, it slows you down a little bit. Like, yeah, things are going to come a little slower. Maybe it's not going to seem as efficient to you, but like if you get into that flow, it can kind of be like calming in a way, just to kind of go with the flow, go with it the same way that they would approach it. Like just go with it. It's gonna happen. You don't need to control it. Just lower your expectations a little bit. And I think it's a good thing for us overall. For me, it's like relaxed me. It slowed me down a little bit. Like in Spain, they say mañana, you know, everything will happen tomorrow. And it's like that might mean like 1 week from now. And at first it's annoying, but then you just kind of like, that's cool. That same expectation applies to me. Like if you tell me you need something tomorrow and I say, okay, like I don't have to be super anxious about actually delivering that tomorrow. I have more time than that. And I don't know, that change of mindset's been helpful to me.
Yeah, I think it's kind of refreshing. I think there's goods and bads. If the whole world operated that way, I don't know if I don't know if I'd be able to talk to you on like a $600 laptop. It probably would cost 3 grand. Whatever. That's another talk show.
Yeah. No, but you're right. It's again about finding that balance and evening things back out a little bit. We'll be right back to the show after a quick break for a note from our sponsor. This season is brought to you by my good friends over at Insured Nomads. They're the absolute best in the business when it comes to providing health, travel, and medical insurance for nomads, expats, and really just all forms of world travelers. I know insurance is often something that's overlooked when we're fantasizing about traveling the world, but it's absolutely necessity that we address this because often the policy you have in your home country isn't going to cover you while you're abroad. And it's also a requirement, as a lot of people may not realize, to actually buy private travel or expat insurance, as it's called sometimes, to obtain a visa or even enter certain countries. So fortunately, there are companies like Insured Nomads to help us with this. Not only do they have excellent coverage and great prices, but they're also providing a first-class experience with additional perks and best-in-class technology via their app. It's an amazing experience. I can't recommend it enough. Now, this is a company that was built by world travelers for world travelers. So they know what it's like to find yourself in a difficult medical situation abroad, and they want to keep you from having that same bad experience. So the next time you're planning a trip abroad, whether it's for a week or a lifetime, check out Insured Nomads via the link in the show notes. Hey guys, so many of you write in asking how to support the show best. And if you are listening and made it this far into the episode, then I'm going to presume that perhaps you're one of those people that wants to help. So if that's the case, the best thing you could do right now would be to open up the app that you're currently using to listen to this episode. Go to the little arrow thing that allows you to share, select it, and share it to one of your social media networks. That would be a huge, huge help. You can feel free to tag me at DC Warrington, and I'll slap you a virtual high five from wherever I am in the world. Thank you so much for the support. We really appreciate it, and I hope you enjoy listening to the rest of this episode.
It's funny with the Italian culture, because it is so laid back, and I think Spain is pretty similar. In every way, they just are more relaxed and take time, with two exceptions. And I've noticed the two exceptions are A, when they're drinking coffee, and B, when they're driving. So typically an Italian cafe, which here they call them bars. I'm not sure what it's like. For, in the US, a bar to us is a pub where you go to drink. Here, a bar is where you go get your breakfast, your cafe, croissants, or cornettos, they call them. And then, they're usually open all day. If you go there in the morning when people are, getting ready to go to work, they'll walk up to the bar, physical bar, and order a coffee, and they'll just stand there and drink it, and they'll be gone in like a minute.
It's like a little espresso shot, right?
It's an espresso shot, and maybe they'll get a cappuccino, but they don't take their time with the coffee. They don't have, the tall coffees like we have in the US, where they'll kind of sip it and enjoy it. It's a weird paradox that I see. They drink their coffee real fast. They don't savor it. And then you put them behind the wheel of a car, and they just, it's like everybody's in a race to get to wherever they're going. And then they get out of the car, all of a sudden it's just back to tranquilo.
So I got to ask you this on the driving thing, and for anyone listening, yeah, we'll get back to the visa stuff. I know that's why you're here, but this is fun for us to nerd out on as well. Driving in Italy is notoriously an interesting thing because for the reasons that you just mentioned, and also something I've noticed recently. I have a camper van. Previously, I used to do a lot of train traveling around Europe, and now I'm doing a lot of like driving around Europe. And so I've been driving more in Italy in the last few years. And something that cracks me up is the way that the ramps are. Like when you're gonna exit a highway, you do like 5 loops. Like they're like the windiest, swerviest exit ramps. They're never just like straight exit ramp off, get on the gas station, get back on. They're always like, when I'm looking at my GPS, there's like, it looks like a plate of spaghetti, like what you're about to do. And it always just cracks me. I'm like, why'd they build the roads like this? I have no idea. It doesn't make any sense. And just the other day, or a couple weeks ago, we were there and in northern Italy, and we got off to get on a gas station, and we did like 3 loops, and then got to a gas station like on the exit ramp where you had to like back in to your gas to pump the gas, and then back out and like do a 3-point turn and then get back on the road. And I was like, who built this like this? So anyway, it's a funny, like, you have to laugh at it and enjoy it, but it's a very notorious Italian thing. Like I crossed back over into France and into Austria actually, and it was like, oh nope, that is gone.
Yeah, it's really strange. And the more south you get in Italy, I won't say the worse it gets, the more extreme it gets. The driving gets a little more intense. The roads get more intense. Everything gets kind of more intense. And the further north you go, the more other European influence there is.
Yeah, it's definitely not to say anything bad. I find it humorous, but yeah, that disparity between the north and south is also really interesting. So you've got now you're into the process. You're pretty far along the way. Do you have expectations that within this year you'll have the passport?
Oh boy, I hope so.
I mean, it seems so. There's nothing telling you that actually this isn't going to work out.
Really, the point we are now is it's kind of an any day thing. It's like any day now, we're hoping to get a note from the Comune that we're ready to come in and sign our paperwork. And that's I'm glad you asked that, because I want to stress for people who are interested in doing this, you can't look at this as an easy way in to just go spend time in Europe with an extended visa. It's a lot of work. It's expensive if you do it with help, which you should, which I can say why. It's a lot of paperwork, and you just have to have a lot of patience. You can't have a specific timeline in mind. When I first had this idea, my initial intent was to do a sabbatical from my job and say, I'm going to do this and come back on this day and come back to my job. But I couldn't give them a specific date because it's so open-ended, up to say a year. So you just have to be very flexible and go with a lot of flexibility. And if you're doing it DIY, so some people try to do this totally DIY. So they come over, try to find an apartment, talk with the Comune, do all the paperwork, go to all the appointments to get the permesso and the residency permit and all these things, doing it on their own. And there's horror story after horror story of people just having, Italians in the offices shout at them because they don't speak good enough English, or they don't want to help them, or they painting a very bad picture of the Italians with this statement. And it's not accurate, but when these people are working and their job is to do the stuff for you, it can be very tricky. I've heard cases where people will have a non-Italian last name and get treated differently. Real thing. So that's all to say. And, there's people who do it DIY and can speak good enough Italian and have just, do it successfully. I didn't want to go through that because I had read enough of other people's experience that it's helpful to, if you can afford it, which is what I'm doing, you basically have a company that helps with they have relationships with landlords. So they set us up with an apartment. They set us up with all our appointments. They're doing the in-person translations. They picked me up from the train station when I arrived. They're doing all the stuff that foreigners really struggle with. It pays a lot to make it a lot easier for you. So you can, if you're trying to make it an enjoyable experience, which it's made it more enjoyable for me to be able to have that luxury. And finding the apartment is also a big struggle for people to get, because without an apartment, and here's the other tricky thing, you want to do this in a comune that is accepting new applicants. I'll call them, for lack of a better term. Some of them, like I emailed a few at the beginning, and they would just say, are you accepting? I'm planning on moving to Italy to have my citizenship recognized. I'm planning on going to Italy to have my citizenship recognized. Do you have availability for this? And some of them just say, no, we can't accept people right now. We're full. We have too many people in process. So for that reason, you have to be very particular about what comune you do it in. The nice thing is there's 8,000 comune in Italy to do it in. The not so nice thing is there's 8,000 comune in Italy to do it in. So it's just very overwhelming to know. And you have everything from Rome and Milan all the way down to towns with 300 people. So in one extreme, Rome or Milan, they're so big that there's so many people doing it that the process moves very slow. On the other end, you have a town that's so small that they don't even know that the law exists. And you have to show them the paperwork, the law, the article that says this is a process and these are the steps. So ideally, you want to find somewhere kind of in the middle. And the plus side of using a company for help, they're called a service provider typically. So if you're using a service provider for help, they will have pre-established relationships with a handful. In my case, the one I'm using, they had pre-established relationships with a handful of communes and landlords. So they know that they're accepting applicants. They know the people there. They know if they're not accepting applicants. So it's the communes can be pretty sensitive. And the last thing you want to do is get an apartment somewhere, find, of the 20 apartment landlords you contacted, one of them finally responded to your email and you got in and you looked at it and you said, okay, I'm going to live here. You get in, you get the lease agreement, you're a resident. And then you go to the comune and realize, oh, they don't want to deal with you, or they're too full of applicants right now, or they're just difficult to deal with. And now you're stuck with, say, a 6 month or 1 year lease term in a town that can't process you. So it's very risky to do a DIY.
Wow, this is super useful information. So let me regurgitate regurgitate what I hear, and you correct me if I'm wrong anywhere. If I were going to start this process, if I were in your shoes and going to go to Italy to start this process, the first thing to do would be to contact these comunes to figure out where you want to go establish yourself. Is that correct?
I think the first thing would be to read. So there's a Facebook group called Dual US Italian, and they have a companion website that I find to be much easier to read because the Facebook interface is almost impossible to read. They have a ton of guides, and they have people in there who just volunteer their time to help people with this. They're extremely knowledgeable. People are posting questions on there all the time. They have guides on everything about this. Basically, every question you want is answered there. On Facebook, it's kind of daunting and difficult to navigate. Their website is much better. I think it's, actually I had it written down, dualusitalian.com.
Dualusitalian.com. Okay, yeah, we'll add that to the show notes as well. So yeah, so go there, do your research, find the information. I mean, Facebook groups are awesome in this regard, and like I don't use Facebook at all anymore, but my wife has an account pretty much just for this. Like expat groups and visa groups are huge and so helpful. People are so generous with their time and information.
Yeah. So people should read that first. Read all the guides first. I mean, really, sometimes you have to read it like 3 times. It's so much information. You need to understand the process before you start reaching out, because you're not really going to know what you're asking. And also, if you just fire off an email to a comune in English or broken Italian, they might not respond, or they're going to respond rather. So do some reading first. Read about other people's experience in the Facebook group. And I'll, at the end of this, I'll share my Twitter handle. If people have any questions about this or want to reach out, I can point in any direction. I'm not an expert, but I know a lot. I've done a lot of research on this, and it's overwhelming, but if you can do it, if you have the patience, if you have the time, and ideally if you have some additional resources to use a service provider.
Yeah.
It can be a really interesting and fun experience. I've really enjoyed it. I've learned a lot about Italian culture. I'm learning the language, which is a lot of fun. And I want to make sure I've covered all bases for the citizenship thing, because it is.
Yeah. Let me ask a couple specific questions that I know I have in case others have or were wondering something as well. So you do that research, if we're thinking through this like logistically, you do that research, and then you want to, kind of figure out geographically where you might want to go establish yourself during this process, reach out to some comunes and figure that out. Is there a easy way? Like you said, there's 8,000 comunes. Like, would you suggest a certain process by which to narrow that down? In your case, you knew where you wanted to go, you had the connection and all that. But like for me, I don't,
Yeah, which I should say, I'm not actually living in the town that my ancestors were from. And that seems strange. And why did I do it that way? And the reason is because I did talk with some people there, and I think they were less familiar with the process. And I think, being in southern Italy, there's a higher likelihood it would take a bit longer. And there was too much uncertainty around it. And I didn't know how long I might get stuck in a situation that I couldn't get out of. So the service provider that I'm using set us up in a town in central Italy that is roughly the same size. But yeah, it's through the service provider that I ended up here. So our familial connection helped us with the initial documents, which is hard for a lot of people, but there's people who can help you dig those up if you don't know where your ancestors are from. So they set us up in this town, and that made our choice rather easy. Before I was going to use them, I was trying to do it on my own. I was looking at Modena, which is a small city outside of Bologna, because I had heard good things about the city in general, and they were kind of responsive to my emails. But then trying to find an apartment is almost impossible if you're not on the ground there. And I saw that the risks were too high of getting stuck in the lease. So for people to start, you want to narrow down to the population is probably a good first indicator. I think somewhere between 10 and 50,000 people is usually a good size for this. There could be more on either side, and it depends. And again, there's always exceptions. I've met people who did this in Rome and did it very quickly in 3 or 4 months, but those are anomalies. I mean, a lot of people want to go to Rome. They want to live in Rome. They want to live in Milan. You might realize that, with this process, you might not be able to end up in like a really cool spot that everybody's heard of. You're probably not going to do this in Positano on the Amalfi Coast. You're probably not going to do this in Turin. That's very unlikely. You're not going to be doing it in Venice. It's going to be in probably a no-name town. But we found, my cousin and I, that we ended up in a quote-unquote no-name town. We had never heard of it. Nobody's ever heard of it outside of Italy. Most people in Italy haven't heard of it. But we love it. I mean, the people here are amazing. It's such a cool culture. So, sorry, long way to answer your question. Starting with the population is a good one. Obviously, knowing what region you want to be in is important, but you have to keep the main thing, which if your goal is to get the citizenship recognized, that has to be priority number one. And so you want to go where it's going to be the easiest, where they know the process. Ideally, on their Comune's website, they'll have some literature about the process, which is an indication that they know what it is. If some of them don't have it, and like I said, if anybody wants to reach out to me to help with that kind of thing, I can help narrow down like maybe regions to look at, regions to avoid. But at the end of the day, the most guaranteed way to get this is going to be with a service provider, because they will know the Comunes, they'll know the people's names at the Comune.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because I've tried to do visa stuff on my own. I've done it a couple times. It's always brutal, and I've just defaulted now to I always just hire a service provider, and it's not super hard to find them. If you Google this process, Italy, a bunch of them are going to probably pop up. So I guess I would just ask you, more generally speaking, can you provide any major bullet points around any advice around finding a service provider, any recommendations, rough price estimates? They range. You can pay $100 to $50,000 to get help with this kind of stuff. So any details that you could provide that would be helpful for somebody who's just totally unfamiliar with this process?
Yeah. So the service providers, in terms of what they provide, vary. So in the case of what I'm doing, I did all of the pre-work DIYs. By pre-work, I mean collecting all the familial paperwork, getting everything translated, getting everything certified, putting everything in line, making a package, getting the naturalization documents. I did all that on my own, which saved me some money. You could, if you're Stanley Tucci and you're rich and you want to do this, you could just pay somebody a lump sum and they will do everything for you. I didn't want to do that. So I did a lot of that on my own. So that saved me some. What I'm paying for is the arrive in Italy side of it. So it's the residency help, the apartment, the Comune meetings, appointments, and all that stuff. I've seen, if you're going the consulate route, I've seen the packages for that cost anywhere from 5 to 10,000, and that expense, it's a lot, and that comes from a lot of research. It can be a lot of time consuming efforts and things like that, and some people have people on the ground in Italy that will go find those documents. Sometimes to do a whole package of the documents and the Italy on the ground in Italy service, it can be a little bit more. I think it's definitely going to be closer to 10 grand in that case. For my case, being just the Italy side of things, it was on the lower end of that. So I've saved quite a bit by doing a lot of the pre-work on my own, collecting the paperwork. And I think it's good to do. If you have the time and the patience, you're going to be mailing a ton of letters to a lot of places in the US. You're going to be writing a ton of emails you're going to be ordering a ton of vital records. So you'll be phoning up for, birth records and marriage records, and translations, which is another cost, and then certifications of those translations, which is called an apostille, which basically recognizes that it is a document that can be used internationally.
Not to be confused with notarized document, which I made the mistake of doing the first time I had to get something apostilled. I showed up with a notarized version, and they're like, "This is not apostilled," and I was like, "That's the same, right?" And they're like, "No."
Yeah. So doing all that, you can learn a lot about your family lineage, where people live, how many kids they had. You can it's cool. You can look up the census records for your ancestors when they came over. Sometimes they say how much money they had on them, what they did for a living. I think my ancestor it said he was like a shoe shiner or something. It's just these, adorable 1920s Italian things. So you can learn a lot, but if you don't want to do that, you can pay somebody to do it. But I think if you can, and the Facebook group is definitely catered to DIYers. It exists for people doing it on their own. I think I point everybody to that for any question you have, any uncertainties. And so I would say between 4 and 10 grand. I've seen higher, but I think 10 grand is generally the high end, and 3 is probably the entry.
What's been the high and the low of this whole experience from start to finish? From when you first got this idea in your head to where you sit today. I'm sure there's been some peaks and valleys, but what stands out as the high and the low for you?
See if I can start with the low so I can end it on a high note. The low, I don't know if it's been a low so much as a learning experience, which is that I guess it's a coming to reality thing, which is when you have a perception of something in your head before you do it, and then you actually do it, and you, in my case, move to a new place. Things do become normalized. Like we were chatting a little bit about before we started recording, you find yourself saying things like for example, a few weeks ago, I was flying to the Netherlands. I did a short trip. I had some friends, some old colleagues from the US that were traveling there, and I wanted to meet up with them. So I flew to the Netherlands. I had to fly out of Rome, and my flight out of Rome was pretty early in the morning, and it was too early for me to go from home and get to the airport. So I had to go the night before and stay in Rome. And I said a couple of days before, like, man, now I got to go stay in Rome the night before. I don't want to do that. And then I caught myself like, okay, I just have to get on a train, and in 2.5 hours, I'm in Rome, Italy, and I'm complaining about that. It's ridiculous. It's totally ridiculous. And the reality of things becoming normalized is it kind of bums me out a little bit, because you do get used to things. And I think it just kind of points to being, trying to be grateful for all these things. And that's a huge thing to be grateful for. And it doesn't have to be that, obviously. You can be grateful for smaller things, but realizing that, living somewhere is different than being on vacation. That's been a real learning experience. And it hasn't been a downer, but it's been kind of a little bit of a slap in the face that it changes a little bit once you're here. And then it's also the same when I have friends that come out from the US on trips, and they're like all excited about, they want to come out here and see me and do all this stuff. And they want to see all these, they want to go look at this tourist thing and go see this site and go see this. And I'm more, can't we just go and just exist in this interesting place? And it's like, let's just go get some good food and have some drinks and walk around and talk to some strangers. And maybe we'll go see a site, but we don't have to have a, strict itinerary, which not everybody's that way. I recognize that. And none of my friends are really that way, but it does change your mindset a bit about like, no, let's just be. But you also have to remember, okay, your friend paid a lot of money to come out here for 2 weeks. They want to maximize their time. I get that. So I would say that's been my rude awakening kind of thing, but it's ultimately a positive to learn that. That's such a cheesy thing to change the negative into a positive, but that's all I can do.
I think it's really relatable. And I think it's what a lot of people living abroad go through, because you transition from it being like a quick vacation experience to like, this is just day-to-day life. And sometimes I think the low there can be like when what used to be a really big high, like, oh, walking through this cute Italian village and having that little coffee standing next to another Italian, that was a super awesome experience. That was a 10 on a 1 to 10 scale for a couple weeks. And now it's like it's just your everyday. And I think that can be a little bit sombering at times, where it's like, why doesn't this get me pumped up? Like I should be on the same level as my friend visiting. I've only been here for a couple months, but like it happens quickly. And I think that can be sombering in its own way.
Yeah, exactly. You hit the nail on the head with that. I don't know. Like, where do I even start? In terms of the citizenship process, that's kind of dull and paperwork. So that's just kind of a thing that exists. In terms of just the experience itself, I would say the flexible travel, if you can do it, at least for a little bit of time, it just opens up so many doors to being able to do things. One thing that stands out to me, when I first arrived, I was staying in Florence. I had some time to kill before I could move into my apartment. So I was staying in Florence for a few weeks. I think I went to Cinque Terre for the day. It was just a day trip. And then I was coming back to Florence, and I had to like change trains in Pisa or something. It was Pisa. And come to Italy, you'll realize that sometimes the trains are great, infinitely better than in the US. But sometimes platform number on the app on your phone and the platform number on the board at the train station don't always match. And the train that you think is here is actually 2 platforms over. And it goes back to the flexibility. Sometimes you might just be, going the wrong direction, and that's okay. But I was waiting on this platform for my train, and it was pretty quiet. It was just me. And then there was this girl there who was on the same platform, and I was like, I don't know if I'm getting on the right train. So I asked her, I was like, are you also going to Florence? I asked her in Italian. You just assume people speak Italian, as you probably should. I asked her in Italy, like, are you also going to Florence? And she didn't understand. And I asked her in English, and she didn't understand. Turns out she was Argentinian, and I had studied Spanish like a tiny bit, but it was enough to be like barely conversational. So I asked her, like, are you going to Florence? She said yes. Because another thing I've learned doing this traveling is, if you're going to be late to a plane, or you're going to miss a train, or your train's going the wrong way, it's good to have company, so you can be lost at least with somebody else, even if they're strange. That happened on a connection, and if you're a connecting flight and you miss the plane, that's happened. It's good to be with other people who are in the same boat. Anyway, so we got on the train, and we were just chatting, and she didn't speak a single word of English, which was, I had never experienced that before. Well, I had, but like not trying to have a conversation with someone that doesn't speak the same language. Like, that's a new experience. Yes. Yeah. Yes. But for me, I think that's one of the most fun things in the world. And maybe it annoys people to an extent, but as soon as she said she was Argentina, I was like, all right, I took Spanish lessons. My teacher was from Argentina, so I speak it with a little bit of an Argentinian accent. I was like, let's see how far I can take this conversation. Anyway, so we we took the train back. We were chatting quite a bit. And long story short, we ended up going to, she said she was going to Venice the next day and I was going to Siena. But I thought like, well, I haven't been to Venice yet. So I ended up changing my plans, which you can do if you don't have to go to work to the next day, or you don't have a commitment. It's like, you know what? I just decided to go to Venice the next day instead. So I went to Venice with her, and I have a friend that lives in Venice that I reached out to beforehand. I said, hey, I'm coming out to Venice with a friend and just want to let you know we can meet up. We could all grab drinks or dinner somewhere. She said, yeah, that sounds great. And then she said, by the way, she's a jazz vocal teacher. She said, I'm teaching a course this week that ends tomorrow. And tomorrow my students are doing their jazz vocal recital. So if you want to play, I play jazz guitar, like gypsy jazz swing. She's like, if you want to bring a guitar, you can sit in with the piano player and play with my students as they're singing. I was like, hell yeah. So I brought the guitar. And then we get there and we're, walking around Venice, which is beautiful. I asked my friend, I was like, hey, my friend and I are looking for a gondola ride, the canal boat rides. Like, where's the best place to find one of those rides? She's like, wait, don't waste your money on that. I have a boat. I have to run an errand. I'll just pick you guys up and I can give you guys a quick tour. So my friend rolls up to this dock and picks us up and just gives us a private tour of Venice and her boat, because they don't have cars there. They have boats to get around. And it was just, yeah. And so we did that. And then later that night, we went to her friend's house who has the piano, and all her students were there. And there was this beautiful, like, third floor apartment in Venice with these big windows and the piano and like overlooking the canal. And I was just playing music with them, and there's the Argentinian girl sitting over there. And I just had this moment of like, what the hell am I doing? I just met this girl yesterday. I just met my friend like 2 weeks ago once. But before that, we were just kind of chatting and WhatsApp and stuff. And it was just so surreal and strange and amazing. And that was the kind of thing that only happens if you have like flexible travel like that. And if you just talk to strangers, which I've gotten more used to. And also if you can open yourself up with other languages, I mean, that's just, and I'm new to that. I didn't really start learning anything outside of English until like a year and a half ago. That just unlocks so many things, just social and fun opportunities. So that was a big high. And then after the recital at the guy's house, we all, like 15 of us, went to this Venetian restaurant and ate this amazing food. And then I had my guitar. Somebody else had a guitar. We pulled the guitars out and we just played music in the restaurant until they kicked us out at like 12:30.
Because you can do that kind of thing in Italy and they don't care. I mean, that's what I've got this like huge grin on my face just listening to your story, because that just sounds so idealistic. Like that sounds like it was written in a book, and that's just your reality right now, which I think, you mentioned like, yeah, that's partly due to the fact that you have this flexibility right now, which may not be the case for everyone or may not be your reality for forever, but it is right now. And it's your reality because you took that leap of faith, you made the sacrifices, you did all this. So like, give yourself credit for that, because a lot of people won't. And I get emails all the time from people listening to the show who say like they want to go have that experience, but they're kind of scared to do it because you do have to make these sacrifices. So I hope that story is as fun and inspirational for somebody out there going like, I want to go, okay, yeah, I got to go play gypsy jazz guitar in a Venetian restaurant, and try to speak multiple languages that I don't really speak, because I mean, that's like that's living right there. That's beautiful. Sounds like a lot of fun. I wish I could have been there. I'm envious.
Yeah, it was great. I'm sure you've had experiences like that.
Yeah, I mean, to a degree, but like that was a really special one. Funny thing I'll just mention real quick about the train thing is I actually missed a train in Italy. Like when I first started traveling in Europe, I don't know, maybe like 15, 17 years ago, something like that. And I ended up having to sleep in a train station in Italy by myself. Like it was just a kind of a rough experience, a small town, like not like you're in Venice or Rome or something, like in the middle of nowhere. And I learned at that point, like I promised myself then, like, okay, I'm not going to do this again. It was just because I was scared to ask somebody a question. Like I didn't speak Italian and I was like, I don't know how to ask, like, is this the right train or not? My intuition told me it was, but the sign said something different. And I was like, I don't know. The train left. It was the one I was supposed to be on. It was the last one of the night. So I slept in a train station. All to say, like, I promised myself from that point, I'm always just going to ask people. I'm just going to ask more questions. Like I'm going to confirm and reconfirm. And even if you don't, wherever you are, just like ask the questions. And often you end up meeting cool people. They end up helping you. My wife and I were just on a train the other day and like we did that. She asked this girl a question. We thought we knew, but they ended up sitting on the train and talking for like the entire route and like having a good time. So I don't know, just put yourself out there, ask questions, confirm. It normally ends up it's a good thing.
Yeah, that man, overnight in a Italian train station could, depending on where it is, could be interesting. But most people here, I mean, I think Spain's the same way. It's so safe. I mean, the biggest risk of anything is like people talk about like pickpocketing, which is definitely a thing in Europe, especially somewhere further south in Italy. But I mean, in Florence, I remember when I first arrived, something I would never do in, I'll say, some parts of Atlanta, but I'd be walking home at like 3 a.m. by myself in Florence and just feel like totally safe. Now it's different for a guy, I get that, but it's just you can sleep overnight at a train station in Europe and you'll probably be okay.
But yeah, I would felt more comfortable, even though it was a little dicey. It was like I felt more comfortable than if I had to do that in most parts of the U.S. I can say for sure I felt that like level of like I'll be fine. Man, this has been so fun. I feel like there's probably a bazillion questions I could keep asking you. I would actually love to know more, like to talk more about just traveling in Italy and stuff, but I know we got to let you go, and you've already given me plenty of your time. So thank you so much for sharing the story. We'll include all these links in the show notes that we've mentioned, but where can people follow along your journey if anywhere, and we'll add those as well.
Yes, they can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Quas Italiano, so QUAS Italiano. And I'm not super active on Twitter, but I think I'd like to be more so, especially if I can be a resource to people. And Twitter seems to be the most general. Not everybody uses Instagram, not everybody uses et cetera, et cetera. But they can reach me there. I'm going to as much of Italy as I can while I'm here. So there's 20 regions in Italy. I've been to 10 so far. And my goal is to be through all of them, at least hopefully by March. And I love to give people recommendations, things to go, things to see, food to try, etc. So if anybody has any questions about the citizenship thing or just traveling to Italy in general, things to look out for, what to expect, what to not expect, don't hesitate to reach out. And that goes for you as well. I'd love to do this again if you want. I could keep talking about this stuff and travel all day.
Yeah, me too. Well, let's get out of here on a fun high note then. Give us one recommendation off the beaten path, not Venice, not Rome. Where's one of these regions or places within one of these regions that people should put on their bucket list if it's not already?
So Naples gets a bad rap. It's people love it or hate it. I love it. I think everybody should at least go and try. And I know that's still a big city and it could be touristy spots, but go to Naples, go to downtown Naples, walk around, have a $5 pizza. It'll be the best pizza you ever had. Talk to the locals, listen to the weird accent. And, if you're in Naples, go west a little bit and go out to the peninsula, kind of more off the beaten path in a direction towards like Monte di Procida. So that whole region is beautiful, but give Naples a shot. I don't think enough people do.
My response to my own question would be Apulia. Puglia is I guess I don't know if you counted if it's on the map for most people or not, but Lecce and that whole area is really, really gorgeous and a place that I didn't get to until later in my travels. My favorite place is Cinque Terre, even though it's super touristy. I don't care. I could just go back there a million times. It's just insane.
And Sardinia, the list just goes on. I would just say Italy is an answer to your question because you can get everything. You can get the most beautiful beaches, the most beautiful mountains. It's all here.
Yeah. Sicily is another thing. We could just do a whole show on Sicily. I feel that's an incredible place. Yeah, I love you picked a great place to call home for now, and I'm glad we got to dive into it a little bit. Maybe we'll do a follow up and just go all out on the country of just talking about the different places. That'd be a lot of fun. But I think this one today was really interesting for people who actually some of the most popular episodes we've ever done here are just kind of like this, where we're focusing on how people can actually make the move to a place. I think you provided some awesome tangible advice, and so thank you for sharing. I'll let you go now. Grazie mille. Let's stay in touch.
Grazie, Chase. Great to meet you.
Thanks for tuning in today from wherever you are in the world. Once again, I'm Chase, and this has been another episode of About Abroad. For those of you wondering how you can best support the show, I have made it super simple for you. Just go over to the show notes of the episode that you just finished listening to and click on one of the two following links. aboutabroad.com/newsletter to get our monthly newsletter, no spam, guaranteed, or ratethispodcast.com/aboutabroad, where you can quickly and easily leave a review for the show. It's not just important to me, it also helps more wanderers just like you find us. Finally, don't forget to subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, and we will see you again next week. Thanks again.